everyone, and welcome back to the Water Online Show. I'm your host, Travis Kennedy, publisher here at Water Online, along with my esteemed colleague, as always, Mr. Worldwide, Kevin Westerling, editor here at Water Online. This is brought to you by the leading online destination for the water wastewater market. I'm talking about nothing other than Water Online itself. Today on the Water Online Show, we are digging into a question that the industry can't really avoid anymore. And I learned a lot about this last week at the DC fly-in. If we know what's broken in America's water infrastructure, and we have the funding, we have the technology, and we have the urgency, why aren't we moving faster? Luckily for us, Kevin has all of those answers, so we'll get some input from all of the guests. But one thing that's important to note as we dive into this episode is that there is a new white paper from Veolia and the National Association of Water Companies. And it makes the case that this isn't just an infrastructure issue. It's an economic one. I heard that same point made last week in Washington. But this report really frames water not as a background utility, but as a critical driver of growth, resilience, and national competitiveness. So we're going to go ahead and unpack all of that. I'm joined by two people who sit right at the intersection of policy, operations, and investment. It is none other than Karine Rougé with Veolia and Rob Powelson, president and CEO of the NAWC. Karine, Rob, welcome to the Water Online Show.
Hello.
Hello.
Rob, it's great to be with you. It's good to be with you as well. And Kevin.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, everybody loves hanging out with Kevin. So this is going to be a fun time. So I'm going to go
Fun or too much.
I'm telling you, it's like you're a magnet for attention, man. All right, so I'm going to dive into the first question, and this is proposed to both of you. So the white paper that we talked about calls for infrastructure and calls water infrastructure an economic imperative, not just a public health or environmental issue, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And a lot of that sentiment was seconded and third by a lot of members on the panel at the press conference that we were at for DC Water Week last week. So my question is, what changes practically when we start framing water this way?
Well, I'll start. I think, when you look at our industry and it's a complex industry, right? It's, we all know water is essential for life. Without water, you can't really get into having a viable economic development within your community. We're learning that right now with the development of data centers here in the U.S. Everybody thinks power demand. Absolutely. It's a critical part of it. But having sourced water to a data center for what do you need? What do you need in servers? You need chilling component, and chilling is water.
Absolutely
critical. Big water energy nexus conversations. But to answer your question, policymakers, regulators, and all the industry stakeholders and the consumers need to understand the complexities of the system. And what is that? You have the economics of it. You have the policy side of it, and then you have the infrastructure of it. And you have to look at water kind of in that three-dimensional lens, because if you don't understand the economics of water, we'll call that the value proposition, and you don't understand the policies that need to bolster investment and compliance and address fragmentation, then you can't get at the third dimension of this, which is the pipes, the meter sets, and the infrastructure, the hard infrastructure that delivers the water molecule to the home or business, right?
Yep.
And that's what gets overlooked in this. And water becomes a crisis when a community like Jackson, Mississippi, is on the national news in 2024 when there wasn't water delivery to a community. And everybody's like, how's that happen in the U.S.? Like, isn't the U.S. like, we have this incredible power grid, water grid, great intermodal transportation. But how does this happen? Well, it happens because there's a breakdown in what I just alluded to, those three dimensions of water policy that get overlooked.
Without a doubt. I mean, one thing I just want to interject before, Karine, I want to get your input on this is that I believe it was a utility down in Texas that was speaking on this panel that I was listening to, and they said, quote, "No news is good news when you're a utility. So if you can make sure that you're not making the news, then you're in a pretty good spot. But we need to have the infrastructure behind it.
Well, I call that the doing the boring good. And that's what we
go.
do in the protection of public health.
Without a doubt. Karine, what about you? What do you say?
Yeah, I want to add a bit to that it's a simple thing. When you frame it as an economic imperative, you place a return on investment figure. What we're sharing in the paper is that for every dollar invested in water, it's a $2.5 economic value creation, which means you're in jobs or other things. If you're a public decision maker, you have a choice between either fixing what's visibly an issue, and in what you just said and that Rob was sharing, the boring good, water is rarely a visible issue until you're at the total crisis moment.
Yeah.
And if it's not visible, then it has to make sense with a basic economics return on investment. And when you're able to say, we're going to fix that water system because we want to have more people joining our community, or a data center, industrial manufacturing, I mean, you name it, but more businesses joining, and that people can directly link one with the other.
Yeah.
It's much easier.
I have to agree. When you start intertwining economics into it, that really perks up the ears. So that's a really good point to make. And I wanted to follow up to the answers that you both had. Does that kind of framing resonate with policymakers? And but are we just stuck in we'll fix it when it breaks? I mean, I know that referencing the press conference at Water Week last week, we had Congressman Costa and Congressman Stanton from Arizona and California. And they were talking, there's a lot of innovative things going there, and they didn't seem to be in the camp of fix it when it breaks, but they also said that there was a lot of colleagues on both sides of the aisle that do see it that way. So how do you think that framing resonates with policymakers currently?
I mean, I agree with the contrasted picture.
Uh-huh.
I have a bias to look towards the people who are doing the most, right? And I think that where we can get optimistic is that we do see congressmen, senators, governors, county officials, public works director, right? You name it, at different levels of government, seizing this as a way to make their community more competitive.
Uh-huh.
And really see that path of leadership. And then at the same time, we also see the other contrasted picture. I think the more energy we spend on the first, the better chance we'll have to create a momentum that's going to be virtuous for the whole.
Agreed. Could not agree more. Well said.
Yeah, so I want to jump in and talk about potential disconnects. I mean, I feel like we all know what we need, and we have for years. But we're not. Progress still feels slow getting there. I mean, we have some sort of funding, although we all wish we had more. But I hear there's maybe $100 billion just sitting out there that needs to be scooped up. We have the innovation in the industry, and I think there's plenty of urgency, but yet progress still feels slow. So from your perspective, where is the bottleneck right now?
Let's start with the good news, because we look at the efforts and bipartisan congressional support when we passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which put about $55 billion of federal monies into our water grid for, to help harness the replacement of lead service lines, help with things like PFAS remediation efforts. And that's a good thing, right? $55 billion. But overlay that against what the American Society of Engineers has put out. If we were to go to Congress and get in front of the appropriators and ask for the silver bullet solution, what would it be? Well, we know what it is. The gap analysis shows, whether it's EPA or American Society of Engineers, over the next 20 years, we need to get to $1 trillion, right?
Yep. Just $1 trillion.
Just $1 trillion, right? So that unto itself is it's a great aspirational goal, but the bigger issue for us is Congress cannot think in terms of that North Star to get there. So the bipartisan infrastructure bill, great first start, but to create a long-term funding mechanism and supporting things like state revolving loan funds. We're going to need more money for PFAS remediation. I mean, Black and Veatch has put a study out there that, over the next decade, for compliance alone with the 4 parts per trillion MCL standard, you're looking at about $47 billion of compliance cost. It's good news that there's $13 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. There's still a funding gap.
Yeah.
So again, for us as an industry, I'm a big believer that private capital is going to be a solution going forward, because look, since 1970 in the US, congressional support, federal government support for water and wastewater infrastructure has deteriorated by 40%. That trend line keeps going down. So we're policymakers, to our earlier point, react to crisis. We need more water advocates out there, and taking a more proactive approach to dealing with the systemic, what I call breakdown in funding for water and wastewater infrastructure.
Well said. What do you think, Karine?
I will echo 300% what Rob just said. I think that point on advocacy is it's really, if there's one thing, one message, I'd like to repeat over and over and over, is that all of us have to educate the people around us about water. And what does that mean? Because the issue here is, yes, there's money, there's innovation, there's a lot of goodwill. I mean, we have an industry that's full of people who want to do the right thing, and they're educated, they know how to do it. So yes, things are complex and slow, but the issue is not there. The issue is the lack of urgency in the general population.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we can get crisis, not from actual infrastructure crisis, but from public outcry demanding for better infrastructure, the more we'll get attention from elected officials who might not have that right now in their priorities. And I think that's the bottleneck.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, One Water really means more now than it ever has. I mean, this is infrastructure, and water access across the entire country is imperative. And one example is that, take Georgia, for instance. 98% of Georgia right now is under drought conditions. And you would think that drought conditions are all in the Southwest. That's not the case. Almost every area is touched by this.
Travis, to your point,
yeah,
it's predicted 40 U.S. states over the next decade are going to face the scarcity issue. Mm-hmm. And your example of Georgia, it's northern counties of New Jersey, Governor Murphy.
Right.
It's my home state of Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So water scarcity, to your point, is not driven by geography anymore.
Yeah.
And, the climate pressure is really driving the way we reshape and think about, the pace of capital deployment, and really building into our engineering models how we look at resiliency now, right? We're not dealing in 100-year storms. We're dealing in, the culmination of climate risk, wildfire exposure, you name it, and it's having a profound impact on water delivery.
I agree. I mean, it is a nationwide issue, and the view on it needs to change to inject some urgency here, and that's across the entire public, not just for those that are considered acolytes for the cause. So we did talk about funding just now, and I want to draw a delineation between funding and access. So there's historic federal funding available, as we had just talked about, but in your opinions, are utilities actually able to access and deploy that funding effectively, or are we overestimating its impact? And also, I kind of want to get your opinion on where this money might seem to be getting stuck. But let's take the first one, the first question. Are we overestimating the impact of the funds based solely on how accessible they are?
And I can start, and then Rob, you can chime in. I would say first, this is historic, right? That level of funding is, of course, it's great. It's going to help. And it's going to have an impact. Now, the gap that Rob mentioned originally is still massive.
Yeah.
So we're definitely overestimating the impact if we think this is going to solve the water issues in the US for the years to come. That's clear. But I don't think anybody's really realistically thinking that. And I would point out to something which, for funding to be efficient, you need to have functioning utility governance mechanisms and then people able to execute it, which fortunately, in a lot of places in the country, is there, and which is, I think, the places where funding will be efficient. Takes time to build things, get permits. All of that takes too long versus what we could expect, but ultimately it will be there. The contrast we have to deal with is that there's still a large part of the utilities which are not equipped either from a governance perspective. Maybe they have, they haven't raised rates, or they don't have a rate setting mechanism in a way like private utilities do that allow them to recover from that investment. Maybe they don't have the actual people to make decisions. I'm not even talking about the operators. I'm talking about the decision makers, right? To evaluate the projects and manage it correctly, because we know that there's a staffing shortage, not only on the ground and the field, but also in the decision-making bodies. So I think that's where that's going to slow down the overall impact of the funding. And that's a more systemic issue than just a question of money.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that because this would go to kind of the funding issue, and it often gets overlooked, and that's this whole issue of affordability, right? We're seeing it both on the electric, gas, and water side. That there are affordability pressures out there, right? We're driven by things like EPA, MCL standards, lead and copper rule. These are environmental mandates that, I don't think there's a policymaker out there would say, you know what, I want you to spend less. Yes, I know about those MCL standards. I know about lead service lines, but spend less because, well, no, that would be a bad outcome. So I think policymakers are understanding about it, but let me pick up on affordability. We've learned a lot of lessons coming out of the pandemic, and one of them was, addressing affordability in a way that, customers who pay an electric and gas bill also pay a water and wastewater bill, and Congress put emergency funding, $1.2 billion for a low-income household water assistance program. Yeah. Huge opportunity for our industry. We've been lobbying for this for 30 years. Right. Well, not having, as we see upward pressure on the family budget in the U.S., it's critically important that we get to Congress when we talk about funding to address affordability by having a permanent funding source for LIWAP. And Karine and I have spent, we just came off our visits to Congress, and this is a key priority for our industry. The electric industry has had it for 45 years, and we don't, we've only had a 2-year funding cycle that now has gone dormant. So it's a very important element of, helping those customers that could fall, behind in paying their water and wastewater bill.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, thank you for advocating for that. So getting to the paper that Veolia and NOC did together, it's called Beyond 2050, the Economic Imperative of Water Infrastructure Investment, and we'll be sure to link to that in the description of this video. But so Veolia being a private operator of utilities, and NOC, a national association, and actually...
I love the term NOC.
NOC. Yeah,
NAWC.
Right. Is that my Delco or my Philly coming in? I don't know.
Hey, I'm a Delco guy.
Oh, here we go. There we go.
But you represent private water companies. So what is the right balance today between public utilities and private sector involvement?
Yeah, great question. Look, I start with, as a recovering regulator, chairing the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, I learned very quickly that you can't allow an underperforming utility, especially on the water side, because of the public health exposure, to underinvest or not really run at a compliance standard that meets the basic tenets of the state and federal guidelines. And in our world, it's the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act. So look, 51,000 drinking water systems in this country. is a problem. It's a very big problem. And we've got to get at stricter compliance. As I always use the analogy, we learned a lot of lessons after the 3 Mile Island nuclear issue in the 80s. You have really never heard more. And by the way, Karine's on the call with me here for the podcast. The French know how to run nuclear plants, and we learned from the French. Yeah, it's like we might learn from the French with water delivery.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our nuclear power plants today are some of the most world-class, highly regulated, and you don't hear about it because they're meeting and exceeding the Nuclear Regulatory Commission standards.
No news is
We're
good.
not exactly, and we're nowhere near that in the water side on compliance. 1,500 drinking water systems as we sit here today are in serious non-compliance of the Safe Drinking Water Act, but they're still in business. Right. Like, that's a big problem. And so I just talk about, we can't have 51,000. What's an appropriate number? Hey, if you talk to people like Seth Siegel or, the water experts out there, we probably need to be below 10,000, right? We've got to get there quickly because, the $1 trillion is not going to be able to sustain we're not going to be able to put a trillion into a marketplace with 51,000 drinking water systems. Just not sustainable.
$1 trillion. That's about what Kevin gets paid per episode of this podcast. Karine, what say you?
I would add to that I think if we move beyond the public-private discussion, I think the question of scale that Rob just touched on with the point on fragmentation and consolidation, that notion of scale is what we need to focus on. Because there's a level of scale that allows a utility to function better than a smaller one. And, we work both as a regulated utility, but also as a contract operator to municipally owned system. And I can absolutely testify they're extremely well-run public systems. So it's not about like public's bad or good and private's bad or good. It's really about what's a good size for a utility, number one. And then can we make sure that at the certain size level and certain consolidation level, everybody's treated the same way from a compliance and efficiency perspective? And when you focus on that, then the role of the private sector is, in some cases, I'm convinced, more efficient than a public loan system. Maybe not always. And here I know that I'm not, talking from but I think the reality is that there's space for all models.
True.
Fully publicly owned, fully privately owned, and then everything in between, because that's also the big evolution in the way of the next kind of 20, 30 years in the US is between contract ops models where municipally owned, privately operated, but also water as a service type models where you have a private operator who owns a decentralized system that's servicing a municipality, right? There's a lot of models that can coexist. And I think what really matters, once again, is that they need to be at the right scale to be efficient and to be governed and regulated in the same way. I think if we have that, then everything kind of blends in. It's less of a public-private debate.
Couldn't agree more. And I know earlier in this conversation, and I want to just sort of switch direction a little bit here, because earlier in this conversation, we talked about economics and the role that plays in what we're trying to accomplish nationally. So, this was brought up in the paper. The paper ties water investment directly to economic growth and competitiveness. And we touched on this earlier in the conversation, but can you give a concrete example of how failing water infrastructure actually limits economic development? Like, how specific can we go here?
Well, I can speak to my experience, 3 visits to Jackson, Mississippi, a state capital.
Mm-hmm.
That is for me, a real eye opener, and for our country, it should have been an eye opener that 25,000 cases of bottled water had to be delivered to a state capital in a very impoverished community. But around that community, you've had an exodus of people from the downtown out to the suburbs where the water quality is much different.
Yep.
By the way, the wastewater system you never hear about in Jackson because Veolia has done a phenomenal job managing that asset.
No news is good news.
Exactly. No news is good news. But to think about that system, and look, water is a human right, right? People deserve I don't care, it doesn't matter your skin color, your economics, you deserve access. Consumers deserve access to water. And we failed in that in Jackson. We failed miserably in that. But Jackson was 20 years of failed investment, deferred maintenance, bad engineering culture, bad safety culture, customers not paying their bills, and a death spiral for a utility, right?
Yep.
And the lessons learned there is that is going to disenfranchise not only the community, but it is going to tell the outside community looking to invest, whether you're addressing a site selection of a data center, manufacturing facility, that if you don't have adequate resources, electric grid, gas delivery, water and wastewater, you're not on the selection list. In fact, in the case of Jackson, the local hospital opted to source its own water because they couldn't trust what was coming out of the tap.
That's unbelievable.
That's a sad commentary, right?
Yeah.
And so, and by the way, these issues break down where communities, impoverished communities, are the ones that really there's hypersensitivity around this. So that is one aspect of it that I take to heart. Our organization takes to heart that, by the way, what people don't realize in the case of Jackson, the EPA in an emergency order put $300 million into that system. Now, I am hopeful that over the next decade, that $300 million is going to be deployed in a way that it won't be a 60-minute expose.
Yeah.
I sure hope.
Right.
Not.
I mean, 300 million, again, that's about what Kevin
But think about that.
Yeah.
Another Jackson hits, right?
Yeah.
Can we afford this in this country right now? We have a $40 trillion budget deficit. Can we afford another 300 million here, 300 million there? Look, it would be no.
Yeah.
It's not the way we should be going about effectuating water policy change, both at the state and federal level.
Could not agree more, Rob. What's you, Karine?
I wanted to give a counter example to the Jackson story. I have two, I'll be short, but I have two in mind. One is in Idaho, like in the state of Idaho, right? It's a farming state. Potato farming consumes a lot of water. You've got Micron building a plant, data centers being built up, all of that consumes a lot of water. You've got the state capital, which is growing a lot because there's a lot of people from the West Coast moving out to the mountain states. So lots of population growth. All of that is competing for the same water resources.
Yeah.
What I do find absolutely impressive, and granted, the future will tell us whether it's been successful, but the level of dialogue between the state and the city and the various counterparts and us as a utility, but the regulators and the industrials around what a good water allocation looks like, what a state resource plan looks like in the long run. I mean, that's a perfect example of what dialogue around infrastructure needs to be in general, and especially water. And if that's successful, it's going to be, then, you can have very conflicting needs still being met. Another example of that, which is a bit more historical, is what happened around the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
We've been working in Milwaukee for 25 years. Milwaukee is a perfect example of long foresight and investment in infrastructure, especially wastewater infrastructure, so that the waters of the lake were healthy enough that they could attract and continue to attract industrial manufacturing.
Yeah.
And people. And the city of Milwaukee has been stable, growing. It's a thriving city, which is hard as an ex-industrial city. And I think a lot of that is linked to the fact that they've been always seeing infrastructure as a way to keep their competitivity as a community.
That has to be part of it, right? Besides the fact Milwaukee's known for producing really good beer, which is very important to a lot of people. So, I mean, those are two good examples. I mean, the example you gave about out west, what I call the Yellowstone effect, where everybody kind of wants to move out and have land and work their way. I wonder how much of that has to do with smaller communities being able to communicate more directly versus a more dense population. But tell you what, we'll come back to that. Kevin, if you don't mind if we come back to that later, but I know you had a question for him.
Well, I wanted to get into regulations a bit because we haven't talked much about them, and it's a big part of
very important.
Yeah, so I think we'd all like to see infrastructure renewal be kind of supercharged and have a fire lit under the whole investment activity. But sometimes utilities will cite regulatory complexity, and I would add to that now regulatory uncertainty in many ways as a barrier to moving forward faster. What specific regulatory changes do you think would have the biggest impact right now?
Always blaming regulations.
Hey, man.
Big conversation in Washington is permitting reform. I really, we're not like the oil and gas industry where we're citing interstate pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
That can be very controversial. In our world, water's very local, right? So when you're doing a main replacement, I get it. There's fatigue at the local level. We come in, we trench a pipe, fix the main. Next thing you know, Comcast is coming in. They're tearing up the street. Yeah. So, getting at more coordination amongst the utilities when we're doing our infrastructure replacement, the water and the gas company can collaborate. I haven't solved that one as a recovering regulator. It's almost like, should we all sit down and do some master planning together? But, hindrance for us is, look, you heard me say it earlier. The stricter the compliance, the better off this industry is going to be, right? In the 1970s in this country, we had to pass the Safe Drinking Water Act because the Cuyahoga River was on national television burning for 10 days because of industrial pollution. Karine mentioned New York, the Hudson River Valley. The river was so polluted, it was difficult to swim, and the health effects of that. Chesapeake Bay, largest estuary in our country. Fishing and the impact it had to the fisheries and the oyster industry. We've come full circle in our environmental compact as a country. Slow, but we've made progress. And, here we are today from 1970 to the celebration of the Safe Drinking Water Act, where we were back then treating water molecules at parts per 100, maybe parts per 1,000, where we're now treating at parts per trillion. Think about that. Just the evolution of environmental compliance and how as a country we've come full circle. And we should be proud of that. We should celebrate that. But we also need to recognize through this conversation, we are woefully behind in federal and state support for our water infrastructure.
Could not agree more. Karine, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Rob mentioned affordability support earlier with LIWAP, so I would add that clearly, and that's really something we're pushing forward. Meeting, I can't stress that enough. I like one day I'll be more than happy to spend an hour telling about the complexities, how to build PFAS treatment,
right?
Off landscaping requirement and right away and whatever, which it adding a level of slowness to the whole process, which then makes cost increase more, in a way that doesn't make sense. So clearly, enforcement for sure, as Rob said. I would add that consolidation facilitation, and I know that one is really hard because we're touching at the heart of people's occupation, people's kind of care, power, whatever. But the reality is there is some sort of a forcing mechanism to consolidate that would help and really speed things up.
Yeah.
In a way that would actually help enforcement, affordability, but also speed.
That should be the focus of anything, right? As it relates to what we're trying to get accomplished here. So really good points, really salient points there, Karine, without a doubt. And I was curious if the two of you wouldn't mind if I switched it up just a little bit. We went from funding to economics to regulations, but I am curious about a topic, overarching topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is digital water. So, with that being said, we talk a lot about digital water and smart infrastructure and advanced treatment, but to say the least, adoption's been somewhat uneven. And I'm curious, in your mind, is the challenge really about technology or about utilities being able to implement and scale it? On top of that, what do you think separates utilities that are moving fast from the ones that aren't in terms of adoption? So it's a two-parter. Who wants to go first? I know I just loaded up on just some
I can start because I'm also passionate about that.
excellent, Karine.
Yeah, I think ultimately it links to human leadership, right? Like to do something like that, it's hard because it's new, so you need to be excited for it.
Yeah.
And we know that, like at scale, the staffing and the decision makers in the utility world in the US, people are overworked. Maybe they have 2 or 3 jobs at the same time, and maybe they didn't get the training, or you care for the basics, right? The pipes and stuff. So having a difficult thing that you don't know about and pushing it and getting approval for it, I mean, all of that requires a fire that the system is not really conductive to have at scale. Which is, and which is why I think coming back to kind of, like I know in an organization like ours, because we invest in those solutions and we make them, not mandatory, but part of like our way to service. What we see when we do that is that adoption is very fast.
Interesting. Okay.
The results are really there, but you need that forcing factor.
Yeah.
If you don't have it, which can be people motivation or an organization pushing.
Yeah.
Then it's a bit harder. But technology is there. It's not difficult. The return on investment definitely is there.
Right.
So we should see more of that.
I certainly hope so. What do you think, Rob?
Well, I have, in real life, it was shocking, but about 5 years ago, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners worked on a resolution, and think about this, to encourage recovery for cloud-based computing. Why? Because the electric, gas, water, and wastewater industry were not allowed to recover IT investment costs because regulators didn't understand what the cloud was, right? Think about that. And here we are, yes, utilities are, risk adverse, sometimes the last adopters of technology.
You're kidding.
But every industry around us had moved to a cloud-based computing model where we hadn't. Because why? Because the regulatory agency didn't understand not only cloud-based computing, but the whole notion of the recovery that goes along with this investment. So we've come full circle there. And I also think that, here we are today in a world that, consumers, by the way, we've come a long way. Back in the 70s and 80s, we were calling consumers ratepayers, which is insulting. Consumers of water or utility service, here we have, water efficiency tools made available to them, leak detection devices, energy efficiency programs that customers embrace. And they can do it, by the way, on an iPhone or, a laptop,
right?
And understand a lot about their usage. And consumers today, whether it's behavioral science models, are very sophisticated in how they use their utility service. And that's a good thing. So more tools that keep rolling out. I jokingly say, will we ever have a time of use rate for water usage?
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Well, that would be an interesting caveat to how we currently bill. And when you talk about the slow adoption and the cloud instance, it reminds me of like trying to teach our parents how to do certain things on their phone or their computer. I mean, I just tried to set my mom up with Venmo just yesterday, and man, was that a long conversation.
But once she gets it, she's going to be off to the races, right?
Right, exactly. At the same time, but still, it's like I've had to convince her nobody's going to steal your money.
Right. Yeah.
So advancement has its benefits, but getting people there is a whole nother story.
Talking about, I think we've been pretty optimistic about where the technology is and where it's leading. I think we're there, but there is some pessimism about the big picture and how far we really have to go when it comes to funding and infrastructure that continues to fail, and climate threats. So I mean, if we were to have this same conversation 3 years from now, what would need to be different for you to say we actually turned a corner on this?
Wow, that's a big one, but I'll start.
Yeah.
Hey, look, I would answer it this way. Let's start with, if we're going to answer the question, we better answer it with good metrics, right? So here are my metrics, my wish list of things that I'd like to see. I'd like to see greater compliance gains in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act, right? Less violations. That would be a good outcome. Second thing I'd like to see is more downward pressure on things like main breaks, and accelerated replacement of this aging infrastructure. That would be a great outcome. Lead service lines, another example. And then lastly, that we made huge strides as a country in how we use water. Karine educated me a very long time ago. There's a stat out there that as a country, we are the worst, like we're the highest consumers of water in the world, right? We replenish at a 25% rate. And on water reuse, we're less than 2%. That's awful. So we've got to get serious. This is a finite resource. So my last metrics would like to see a greater penetration around water reuse. And that would be that would be a modest request.
You can't look at that number and not completely agree with what you're saying.
Right.
That's pretty bad. Karine, what say you?
So myself, I'd like to come back to what we said earlier around advocacy and people understanding what we're talking about outside of our water circles.
Yeah.
So I think the KPIs I'll focus on will be like number of TikTok videos talking about water.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I
the
can agree with
second
that.
and the second one, which is less a KPI but more an inspiration, is all of us to go on Joe Rogan next time.
Uh-huh.
To get millions of people here.
He gets half the ratings that Kevin and I get. I mean,
That's right.
Why do you want to
All of us,
downgrade?
right?
Yeah.
All of us, not just,
Joe calls us every week going, how do you do it? And I have to tell him, well, we just get the right guests on. But I'm sorry, Karine, go ahead. Humble brag. Okay. Right on.
According to you, he gets half the money that I get, too.
Yeah, he does, right?
What was it, $1 trillion?
Yeah, it all comes down to
1 point.
If you want to reach people, you got to get the right talent, and that's what we have here with Kevin. So I want to give people an idea as to how they can find your white paper. So what is the best first step they can take to go ahead and access this white paper that we've been referencing throughout our conversation here?
Well, I believe we could post on our website, nawc.org. And I always like to put my email out there, rfp@nawc.com. So for any of your listeners, they can reach out and we will furnish them a copy. But Karine and her team have also made it accessible. We have it published up on social media such as LinkedIn and other channels. So
we have
anybody who wants to Google like Veolia and NWC white paper, there's a link on NWC's website. There's a link on Veolia North America website. So clearly it's out there. And we're both, like my email is my first name dot my last name at veolia.com, and I'll be more than happy to continue the conversation.
Fantastic.
On LinkedIn as well.
LinkedIn as well. That's a good source for it. Kevin, do we have it on Water Online? We do. Excellent.
We have the announcement.
I would hope so.
And we can link right to
as the leading online destination for the market, I would hope we would have this, because this is a phenomenal review, not just of where we are, but where we should be going. So I want to thank you both, Karine Rougé and the RFP, Rob Powelson, President and CEO of the NAWC. Thank you both for joining us here. And for all of you out there listening, watching, we appreciate you spending your time here with Kevin and I on the Water Online Show. And we cannot wait to have you back next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.